I ultimately got two of my classmates expelled and blacklisted from every university in the country. And the best part is, they handed me all the evidence I needed to do it. This whole saga started back in the late 90s. During what should have been a routine, if tedious, archaeology field school in Australia. I was in my third and final year at university, studying archaeology. But my path hadn't been smooth. A severe, recurring illness in my second year had forced me to withdraw from several course subjects, meaning I had to repeat them. This included a compulsory archaeological field school, held during the mid-year holidays. This wasn't just a class. It was where you put all the techniques you'd learned into actual practice. While I had aced the previous year's field school, my illness meant I couldn't complete the associated coursework. So I had to retake both. To understand the situation, you need to know a bit about the university and its grading. The university had campuses spread across the country. The archaeology program was offered at the main campus, where I was, and a sister campus located even further north. The field school itself was held near my main campus, meaning students from the sister campus had to travel for hours and pay for accommodation. A significant commitment. The grading system was pretty standard, descending from a high distinction for a score of 85% or more, down to a simple pass for 50 to 64%. Anything below 50% was a fail, except for a tiny sliver of hope called a pass conceded, for a grade of 48 or 49%. My lecturer, who we'll call Dr. Alastair Finch, was a legend. He was a brilliant teacher, had authored 2 books, and was deeply respected in his field. More than that, he was easygoing, friendly, the kind of professor who would happily share a jug of beer with you on a Friday afternoon. I mention this because in all the time I knew him, I only ever saw him truly angry once. This is important. The field school that year was being held in a gully next to a historic, protected cemetery. The gully, which split the cemetery in two, had essentially been used as a garbage dump for decades. Due to space constraints, there was a limited number of dig sites available. Here was my first hurdle. I lived on campus and had no car, so my travel was dictated by the bus schedule. This meant I would be half an hour late on the first 2 mornings and a full hour late on the weekend. I spoke to Alastair about it beforehand, since we knew each other well. He was fine with it and agreed I wouldn't be penalized. The only catch was that I'd likely be assigned to a group to make up numbers, rather than choosing my own. It was a fair trade, so I agreed. When Friday rolled around, I arrived half an hour late as expected and Alastair introduced me to my group. There were 4 of us. Me, the only woman, but with prior field school experience. Then there was Gary, an older, grizzled geology student taking the course out of interest. And finally, Brendan and Darren, 2 young geology students. Good friends. Both clearly destined for lucrative careers in the mining sector. All 3 were from the sister campus, so they'd traveled at some expense to be there. Alastair made a point of telling them about my experience and to use my knowledge. Brendan and Darren just smiled and waved. Gary just grunted. But as we started surveying our plot, we got to talking. He was a decent guy, just annoyed to be stuck with a bunch of young shits, worrying he'd have to carry the group. I assured him I was there to get the work done and collect the data I needed for the next semester. Now, let me be clear, real archaeology is nothing like the movies. It's not about finding treasure. It's about painstakingly collecting data. Most of it is repetitive and monotonous. You survey your site. You sketch it. You photograph it. You measure out your 1 by 1 meter pit. You take more photos. More sketches. And an initial soil sample before you even break ground. Then you begin scraping off a spit of earth. A layer of a specific depth, in our case, 5 centimeters. You document everything you find. Test the pH of the soil you've removed. And take yet more photos and sketches of the pit. If you find an object, you absolutely cannot remove it. You excavate around it. But it must remain in situ, in its original position, to preserve the contextual data. You only remove it once you're excavating the layer beneath it. It's boring. But it's the foundation of the entire science. Furthermore, the soil at our site was loose and sandy. To prevent the pit walls from collapsing, we were instructed that for every 50 centimeters we dug down, we had to expand the pit sides by 50 centimeters. They didn't expect us to get much deeper than a meter. Maybe 1.5 meters at most. It quickly became obvious that Brendan and Darren had not anticipated this level of monotony. At first, they were excited to dig. But their enthusiasm died as soon as the painstaking recording began. Gary and I had to repeatedly call them over to help with the work. As I was the only one with an old-school film camera, I was the designated photographer. Not just for our site but for candid shots of the whole field school. Day 1 ended. We all went our separate ways for the night. The next morning, a Saturday, I arrived an hour late. At 10 a.m. Right on schedule according to the bus times I'd cleared with Alistair. I spotted him and called out a cheery morning. But the man who turned to face me was not the easygoing lecturer I knew. He was glowering. His jaw tight. His fists clenched. He was radiating pure fury. If looks could kill, I'd have been a permanent resident of the adjacent cemetery. This was it. The one and only time I ever saw him angry. Just get to your group and get to work, he snarled. My heart sank. I thought he was angry at me for being late. Despite our agreement, I stammered. Have I done something wrong? I know I was late. But this was the first bus I could get. I'm really sorry. Alistair sighed. The anger momentarily replaced by exhaustion. No. Chloe. It's not you. You've done nothing wrong. I just can't deal with it right now. Go to your dig site. I'll talk to you later. I walked over to my group site. And what I saw almost brought me to tears. The previous day, we had left a neat 1 by 1 meter pit, 30 centimeters deep. I was now staring at a gaping, jagged hole in the ground, about 1 meter wide and dug down to a depth of nearly 3 meters. Mounds of loose, sandy dirt were piled haphazardly around it, littered with excavated objects just sitting there, completely stripped of their context. The other groups were staring, trying not to stare. No one would talk to us. Gary was practically apoplectic with rage, while Brendan and Darren looked pale and sick. What the ever-loving hell happened here? I demanded. It turned out that after leaving the site Friday night, Brendan and Darren had met up with a friend from another group, a guy we'll call Kevin, and they'd gotten drunk. It was then they decided it would be a brilliant idea to continue digging. This was the moment their futures took a sharp, irreversible turn. Fueled by cheap beer and arrogance, they made a decision that evening that would unravel years of study. All because they were bored. They broke into the protected cemetery site with a shovel and proceeded to dig. And dig. Until one of them passed out at the bottom of the hole. It's a miracle the man didn't die. Waking up and climbing out of a 3-meter deep, 1-meter wide hole in loose, sandy soil without the walls collapsing in on him was a fluke of physics. Alastair had been called to the site at 3 a.m. by the police, who had been alerted by a local resident. To say Brendan, Darren, and Kevin were in trouble would be a colossal understatement. They'd been told in no uncertain terms that after the day was over, they were to pack their things and leave. Alastair would handle formally booting them from the entire archaeology program on Tuesday. One of the other students watching the scene unfold dryly commented that they had certainly dug themselves a hole. It was a perfect, if grim, summary of the situation. This left Gary and me in an impossible position. Luckily for Gary, he was able to join Kevin's old group, as they were all from the same sister campus. I, however, was stranded. No other group could take me on. And something had to be done about the disaster zone that was my assigned dig site. My Saturday was spent trying to document the chaos, to keep Brendan and Darren out of my way. I handed them my camera and told them to photograph every single piece of evidence they had dug up, all 200+ items. They had to use the scale measurement and a small whiteboard to properly label each artifact by its supposed location, spit level, and so on. Chloe just wanted them out of her hair. But in that moment, she unknowingly handed her antagonists the very tool they would use to incriminate themselves. They thought they were being clever, but their immaturity was about to be permanently recorded. It kept them busy for most of the day while I refilled the hole, wishing with every shovelful that they were still at the bottom of it. Eventually, Alastair tacked me onto another group in an observational role. Now for the revenge. The field school was directly linked to a second semester class where you analyzed the data you'd collected and submitted a final report. With only 1 day of legitimate data, I had nothing to base a report on. This was a core class, and I couldn't afford to fail it for a third time. I went to Alastair and we discussed my options. He agreed to let me write a field school critique instead, essentially a how not to do it guide, using my own disastrous experience as the case study. I went to the photo lab to get the film from the field school developed. As I laid the pictures out, I noticed some interesting things. The candid shots I took on that first day showed Brendan and Darren messing with our surveying equipment, potentially contaminating our legitimate data. They were in restricted areas, touching things they shouldn't, and even damaging ornaments on the historic graves near our site. As I looked at the pictures, I found myself wondering why there weren't criminal penalties for desecrating a grave site. Then I looked at the photos they had taken on Saturday. Apparently, furious that I wasn't sympathetic to the catastrophic mess they had created, they had decided to sabotage the only record of the artifacts they'd unearthed. On the little whiteboard that was supposed to be for cataloging information, they had written abusive, misogynistic slurs aimed at me. One that I'll never forget was for a large ceramic clam decoration. The board read, "Oh, I do love a day beside the seaside, with a hairy clam." Others said I was a cunt or alluded to sexual violence. These were the only photos that existed of these artifacts. We'd had to rebury everything when we filled the pit back in. Alastair had told me to use everything I gathered to write my report. So I did. I used every single photo. I submitted the report knowing the best I could hope for was a bare pass. But a pass was all I needed. The fallout came at the beginning of my final year. Alastair told me what happened after I submitted that report. When he saw the full extent of what they had done, so helpfully documented by themselves, and understood exactly how badly they had screwed me over, he went ballistic. This was no longer just about a ruined project or a student's unfair grade. For Alastair, it had become a matter of academic integrity and a duty of care. The report in his hand wasn't just a paper. It was an indictment. And he was about to become its chief prosecutor. He called an emergency meeting with the deans from both campuses and the heads of both the geology and archaeology departments. He presented my report. He told them about my academic history, my passion for the subject, and how my previous work indicated I was a high-achieving student. He explained that the only grade he could possibly give me for the report in his hand was a pass conceded, a mark that was a wholly undeserved stain on my academic record. The fact that Brendan and Darren's actions had led to this was unacceptable. The end result was that Brendan and Darren weren't just expelled from the archaeology program. They were booted from the geology one, too. Furthermore, they were expelled and blacklisted from the university itself. This meant they could never re-enroll. And a permanent black mark on their record would be visible to any other university they applied to, effectively blocking them from obtaining any degree in that field without facing an impossible mountain of red tape. As one person later commented, "The world is simply better off without people like that in any sort of important position." Their actions showed a fundamental lack of character and professionalism that would have been a liability in any field. Unfortunately, the experience soured me on archaeology as a career. I picked up extra courses in history and English and graduated with a major in English literature. After a gap year, I went back to get my teaching degree and found my calling there. In the end, this story is a powerful reminder that malice and immaturity are their own punishment. When you decide to dig a hole for someone else out of spite, don't be surprised when you're the one who ends up buried in it. Have you ever seen someone's own arrogance lead to their spectacular downfall? Let us know in the comments below.